Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is the Chief Research and Development Officer at the Business and Higher Education Roundtable, a not-for-profit organization that brings together Canada's largest companies and post-secondary institutions. Matthew McKean is also a writer, a speaker, and a father of two. He joins us today from Ottawa. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Really interesting topic because we are talking about preparing today's youth for tomorrow's jobs. And the fact is in many cases, we don't even know what those jobs may even look like. So as a father yourself, what could you offer just generally to parents who may be listening or watching this interview in terms of how they can support their children to find a career and a job eventually that they love for tomorrow?
Man, such a good question, and I don't get to answer this one often enough. Although I live and breathe and work in this space, I'm often talking about students who are already in post-secondary and are looking to transition into the workforce. So the opportunity to think about this and talk about it much earlier on is super fun. So honestly, my answer right now would be to expose children or expose kids to as many different things as possible. So this popular narrative that the future jobs, there'll be jobs that don't exist, that the next jobs don't exist yet. I don't know how I've heard that for a long time. I don't know how we prepare for them. So then if they don't exist. But what we know from a lot of the work that we've done is that young people, new grads, people entering the workforce need to have transferable, adaptable skills, what we call the human skills, above and beyond anything else. And that's what we hear from employers too. So exposing kids, helping them figure out where their interest is and helping them to develop those skills that aren't so specific, but will help them transition, develop interest, become good workers, I think is probably at least the place to start. Certainly if they're really young. But
So let me ask you along those lines then, what age do you suggest in general that start?
I don't think there's a wrong answer to that one, and the sooner the better. So there's no scenario in which less education or skills training is helpful. So the sooner we start providing some kind of structured skills training, and that even sounds absurd to talk about that in the context of like preschool or daycare, but I mean we know from all of the studies that have been done about the earliest kind of structured education we can give children. Not in advanced mathematics, obviously, but playing in the sandbox with others. That's all skill building.
So earlier you mentioned about the jobs of the future that we don't know even exist yet. Is that a misnomer then? Because we hear that being reported and being written about quite often.
It might not be a misnomer. I just think it's a really fun catchphrase for people to use. So, but I think we often at BHER say, like, we like to do things and solve challenges and solve problems, or at least try to tackle them and make sense of them. But as I said before, I don't know how you tackle that one then. And so that kind of hyperbole is, if nothing else, not super helpful when it comes to talking to young people, because then I don't know what you tell them. That's
Yes.
that's my pushback in that sense. Mhm.
So how would you characterize the current situation in Canada as it relates to what's being taught in colleges and universities versus the skills that employers are actually looking to hire for?
Oh, that's another good question, and in a lot of ways, it's the part of the origin story of the Business Higher Education Roundtable. A number of years ago, back in 2016 or so, CEOs were sitting around a table and identifying and talking about the different skills and talent challenges they were facing, particularly when it came to hiring new hires. So people, fresh out of post-secondary. And one of the things they commented on or found was that new hires didn't have the skills they were looking for, the entry-level skills they were looking for. Now, when you talk to the post-secondary side, the universities and colleges and polytechnics all thought they were doing probably a great job of preparing people for new grads for the world of work. So we saw that there was an opportunity here, a disconnect. And so that became part of the origin story of the Business Higher Education Roundtable, which is to bring together both sides so they could talk a lot more and figure out where that disconnect is and how to improve alignment, both in terms of the skills training and on the programs that were offered so that people would graduate into sort of in-demand areas. So one of the things we realized along the way was that actually a good way to do that was to get young people work experience while they were studying. So not necessarily to develop really hard technical skills, but to develop those human skills, social, emotional skills that you get from working collaboratively or working on a team, and meeting a deadline, those kinds of things. So that's very much what we do, and here at BHER to try to tackle that challenge. So I don't think we will ever fully solve it, and nor is the goal perfect alignment between both sides. But what we realize is that probably applied work experience goes a long way towards improving outcomes for young people when it comes to skill building, and hopefully getting companies, the new grads, with the skills they need.
Let's backtrack a bit and let me ask you, what do you believe has contributed to this gap in the first place? What are some of those root causes?
That's a good question. That's there's probably a lot of labor market researchers who would have a better answer than I would to that one. Demographic change, people aging out and retiring out of the labor market creates big skills gaps and opportunities. Technological change, but part of the narrative for the longest time too, another one of those catchphrases that starts a lot of reports is, technology is changing fast and the world of work is changing fast, and this idea that robots and AI are going to disrupt the workforce and replace all the humans. That's not proving to be especially true. I think what we're seeing, we know obviously machines are replacing some jobs, but what we're of course seeing is that, and finding through the research, is that we need to find new and better ways to work with the machines and work with AI, and the companies that invest as much into the people as they do into the technology do better and harness that technology. And so I think shifts in technology and shifts in demographics are playing a big role in the changing nature of work.
You alluded to a few of the specific skills that employers are looking for. Could you give us some more examples of the types of skills that companies are looking to hire for?
We do a skills survey every couple of years, and we survey some of the biggest companies, and we'll be doing another one this fall actually, and we're looking to cast a bigger net to include both the big companies and the smaller and medium-sized ones as well. And that's exactly what we asked them. What are the skills that you're looking for? So we've been doing that since 2016, and interestingly, year over year, what came back were at the top of the list were the human skills, and we often call them social emotional skills as well. So, and that's what I was referring to before. So it was, in that bucket of skills is a lot of the obvious ones, communication, writing, oral communication. Those remain critical. But we've seen, and added to that list, is things like courage and resiliency, cross-cultural team collaboration, intercultural collaboration. So these are the skills that continue to come back year over year. And I think part of that is a commentary on the fact that work continues to change, and so we need workers who will change with it. So, and that's, that to me is that's part of that narrative of lifelong learning, but also the adaptability to change with work. So it used to be that you could be probably really good at that one thing and make a career of it. That's not the case anymore. So we need workers who can adapt and change along the way. So now we are seeing, though, on the technical skills side, and it's hard to get too specific on that because it's unique to every sector and every company and every industry, but we are seeing technical skills move up the list in terms of what companies need, but we're seeing more specificity in what companies need in that sense, versus just you have to be good with computers. So maybe more specific requirements around data analysis and cybersecurity and things like that.
So in many households, when your children get to be a certain age, let's say you've done your best as a parent to expose them to all kinds of different things, but then the rubber hits the road and they have to make specific decisions on courses to choose in high school and, moving on into university and college or whatever they choose. How can a parent support during that time in your opinion, in what we're talking about here, which is, oftentimes kids have no idea. They're good at many things, some of them. There's a lot of different considerations. So what would you suggest?
Oh, I love that question too. We talk a lot around here about about what we call alternate labor market information. So, and that sounds technical, but what I mean there is what I would love for young people to do is to think a lot more about the kind of career and life they want, and then think about what jobs might fit into that. So, because so often, and it's heartbreaking, but people pursue diplomas or degrees and they decide halfway through that they're, it's the wrong choice, or they pursue careers that they're not a great fit for because of one pressure or decision or another. But if we could have young people starting to think earlier about, do I want to live in a city? Do I want to have a 9 to 5 job, or do I want the security of a government paycheck versus assuming some element of risk in the private sector? So, or am I entrepreneurial and want to employ myself, or develop something on my own? These kinds of things we don't often factor into the conversations with young people. It's do I want to be an economist or an engineer? And we think about it largely through the lens of the occupation. So, but we know now, and we hear with younger people, they prioritize work-life balance differently than maybe our parents did, and that sort of stuff. But thinking about, I say to my 9-year-old, he loves Lamborghinis. I say, if you want to buy a Lamborghini, then there's a particular subset of jobs and education you're going to need to be able to afford that. So, but that's kind of my backhanded way of getting him to think about that. But man, I would love, that's the alternative labor market information. I mean, is for, if we could provide, and this is something we're trying to work on, but we could provide young people with those kinds of career paths, but maybe it's a life path, and then think about which careers make sense to fit with it. Because that's also one of the biggest, success or failure rates, I think, for people who do a job. You might get into a government job and it's not the right fit for you for a bunch of reasons. And if only you had thought about what that was before you got there.
So when you talk about thinking about what kind of life and career you want to have, how do you see the role of the school or the educational institution in that equation?
Are you in the context of like K-12, are you thinking, or post-secondary, or all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above, but mainly post-secondary.
Mainly post-secondary.
High
We
school,
know high school, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a new pressure I have to imagine on the career offices or guidance offices in K-12 for sure, to provide more, a lot more information about what's happening in the labor market and that sort of thing. We know for sure at the post-secondary level, huge pressure, huge growth of career services and co-op offices these days, because the labor market outcome of graduates, the employability of graduates, that's the top concern, I think, for everybody these days. So, but I don't exactly know how, and this is I'd love to be able to crack, but how to help better resource the K-12 side of that. So, because I know that's probably asking a lot for them to even do what I'm suggesting about to where that information exists. That's a big part of what we try to do at the Business Higher Education Roundtable, which is to build tools and resources to help people make more informed decisions. We spoke, for example, with employers across the country when we were trying to build work integrated learning programs, and said, what are your barriers to creating opportunities for young people? And it wasn't paying the student that was the big challenge, interestingly enough. More often than not, it was knowing how to mentor, how to provide proper assessment, what it meant to create an equitable, diverse, and inclusive experience. And so we started to build the tools and resources to give it to the employers, so that they actually could make more informed decisions and have the tools they needed to actually do this. I suspect in the post-secondaries I think are pretty strong on all of that. The K-12 probably could use a lot more of those kinds of resources, as opposed to just thinking to communicating to students about particular jobs or job pathways. Because again, connected to the other story, those jobs probably won't exist. Then that's maybe not the ideal way to talk to them either. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No, it does for sure. So when we talk about work integrated learning, which is a big part of what your role involves, experiential learning is what it's also referred to in some spheres. What does that look like ideally? What does a good work integrated program in a school look like?
oh, now you're really in our wheelhouse. So, yeah, we're helping the federal government deliver on their commitment to getting every post-secondary student a work experience before they graduate. This is something the Liberal government committed to in 2019 as part of that budget. BHER had kind of led a parade or a coalition of companies and post-secondaries and associations to get the government to make that commitment, in part to solve that challenge I mentioned at the outset about companies saying we aren't getting the graduates with the skills they need. But of course, there's multiple different types of work integrated learning experiences, and we're big champions of trying to figure out what experience makes the most amount of sense, the best sense for the student and for the employer. So there's traditional, what we would call structured work experience. You imagine the student goes in for a 4-month co-op term. In the skilled trades, it's apprenticeships. So those get us so far, and where those kinds of experiences make sense for students, then that and our ideal, that's probably what you might call your deluxe work experience. But we know, though, that there's as many different types of potential work integrated learning opportunities as there are students, and especially for students with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, Indigenous and rural and remote youth, we probably need to create other types of work experiences for them that don't involve going and sitting in an office for 4 months or working on a site. And so that's a big part of what we try to do at BHER, is to actually figure out how to develop out an experience that makes sense for the employer and for the student, and that reduces a lot of the different barriers. So, but any instance in which there's an applied work context, whether it's a project, a company can provide a project that students work on. They can go and do a field study. We are fans of developing, a play or doing something with the arts. Anything where there's some kind of applied experience counts, I think. So, but we're also on the quality front, really committed to ensuring that there's some kind of mentorship, so that the student gets feedback, and there's some kind of reflective practice along the way. They think about what happened, that experience, that they are assessed and provided feedback as well. So there are some trappings that you can layer in, even if it's a short work experience or a longer one. So that's a long answer to that question, but I could go on about that.
Well, and then I guess the follow-up there would be, is there an ideal age or grade that work integrated learning should be introduced in an educational institution?
This is part of the fun, I think, and the benefit of there being different innovative types of work integrated learning. So probably we don't want K-12 students in a company, but we could bring applied real world challenges into the classroom for them, and that has that work context for them and getting them thinking in that way. So, but we do believe in, and we're committed, as is the government, to getting every student, at least in post-secondary, before they graduate, some kind of work experience. Where because there are different types, if you can in first year have a particular type of will that's maybe a smaller project-based will, and before you graduate do that applied work experience where you're actually out off campus and doing something in the field, then I think there isn't one size fits all. There isn't an ideal, but some kind of accumulation of work experience before you graduate. We know the outcomes for students, the employability outcomes. They gain that real world experience. They develop a network, somebody who knows them. A big part of what we're trying to get, where we're trying to get to, is to have new graduates be able to articulate the skills they have. And I think that's been one of the ongoing challenges. We talk about it. It sounds like a overly convoluted word, but that skills articulation piece is really, really important. I did 3 degrees in history. I don't really brag about that, and came out not thinking, my career options were to, work in a museum or in an archive, and none of that really interested me, or be a teacher, of course, too. And that wasn't the path I was looking for either. But I thought that's all I could do. But it didn't occur to me, or I hadn't been conditioned, or through the course syllabi or all the years I spent in school, I hadn't had that conversation about here's the skills you actually have. And this is what an employer wants to know about, not that you know a whole lot about the Industrial Revolution. So or the subject. So and I think that I didn't get a co-op or work experience or anything along the way other than summer jobs. But part of the benefit of that experience, of that work experience, is that it helps the young people understand the skills they have, because they get to apply them and then turn around and communicate that to an employer when they're sitting in front of them for an interview.
So beyond exposing kids to as many different opportunities, beyond work integrated and experiential learning opportunities in schools, is there anything else that we can and should be doing to lessen the gap between how kids are being prepared for tomorrow's jobs?
What kind of things do you have in mind here?
I don't know. I wonder if there's anything else that can be done. Should we be educating teachers potentially in a different way about how to incorporate this in their curriculum? I don't know. These are sort of probably beyond the scope of what you guys are focused on, perhaps.
It's another good question, and there is a lot of talk in our space around training the trainers, and so for sure there is a point. I mean, of rethinking that and layering more in. I think where often the conversation goes though is about the capacity of the trainer, of the teacher, or of the professor to do it. And so that's part of what we need to think through. So there's a lot of asked these days, especially in K-12, of teachers with individualized learning plans and in a classroom. So through to all the other demands on their jobs. And I know professors, whether they're in college or university, would say the same thing. So part of it, and part of what we try to think through, is how do we layer in the extra support, so the extra, in this case, career training, without adding to the burden of, say, the teacher or the professor in the classroom. And so in that sense, it might be, in our case, we support the career services office to provide that support alongside the professor. So, and I can see that probably being something that will need to trickle down into K-12 in the future as well.
You alluded earlier to the survey that BHER will be conducting. I'm interested in the one that was done last year. Were there any particular findings in the 2022 survey that struck you as somebody who is in the weeds of this and thinks about this very topic on a regular basis?
Well, thanks for asking about that. We talk a lot about that survey when we can, and we're excited to see what the next one will find as well. One of the exciting findings comes from what we see as a steady growth and partnerships between post-secondary and industry. So when we first started that out, it was, I want to say, in the 70s, or the range of about 70% or so. And we've seen that climb up through 2022 into the 90% range. And so that, to us, is a validation for an organization like us that is designed specifically and has our mandate to bring together business and higher education, but also speaks to the increasing demand for it and the realization that no one side can do this alone. And that's one of our sort of talking points. So working together, working collaboratively, which is what work integrated learning emphatically is results from a partnership between the school and multiple companies to provide experiences for the young people. That the steady growth of that, I think, is not surprising, but exciting for us, and something we're quite pleased with and proud of, to whatever extent we've been able to help along the way.
Now, what we're talking about here with respect to the gap between the skills that kids are being taught in schools and what they're, being asked for in the workforce, that gap is not a new situation in Canada. Why, though, is it different now? In what ways is it different now?
That's a good question. I spoke the other day to the Globe and Mail on a variation on this theme, and we're seeing more and more questions about this. Why now? I would say there's been a misalignment between post-secondary and the world of work for a long time. Both have kind of operated in their own silos, but in the past, maybe our parents' generation, they could graduate with a diploma or degree and get a job and have relatively successful careers over time. The complexity of jobs today, the complexity of the job market, and I try to avoid the hyperbole whenever I can, but the fast changing nature of it means that what we're seeing is that new graduates are taking longer to land and to find the job in the field that's a right fit for them. We've heard the narrative about the barista with the BA. There's a long-standing narrative in Canada of underemployed PhDs who don't get a job in academia and then struggle with that transition. I lived and breathed that one myself. I called it my wilderness years. So it took me a long time to figure out, as I was saying before, what my skills were and to articulate it to an employer before I then made traction. So it's that transition period that I think, in part because of the complexity of the labor market, that has now created a new urgency around this conversation and a new urgency to try to solve it. So especially in an environment when we need more people and there are labor shortage, or the labor market is full, we need more people. So there's a new urgency right now for sure.
Many organizations, particularly in the US, in terms of the research that I was able to uncover, have turned to creating their own workforces and educating their own workers to potentially work with that organization down the line, meeting the specific needs of that company. An example that comes to mind is Caterpillar University.
Right.
Is this a trend that you see having a place? And if so, is this something that should be done more?
It's definitely a trend. It's probably actually just a normal thing that's been happening for a long time, to be honest. There's myriad instances of that. We convened a skills working group also last year. There's another report next to the skills survey where we brought together about 10 of the big companies in Canada and asked them exactly this. What are you doing when it comes to skilling, reskilling, upskilling your employees? And the biggest companies were doing it themselves more often than not and had developed their own programs, their own universities. So this speaks to that siloing I was saying before. We talk to them and say, why is that? And they spoke about the barriers they faced in partnering with a post-secondary institution to do that. So there's perceptions about the sluggishness of a post-secondary institution, particularly university, to be agile enough to develop a course that they need. So, but our, of course, mandate is to bring both sides together. So post-secondaries, that's what they're good at, is the curriculum design and pedagogy, and they provide all the wraparound services for a learner so that they can be supported along the way. So and it pains us to see the duplication of efforts in Canada, even among a for-profit company, to reinvent or invent courses that probably exist somewhere else. So yes, we are seeing that. I think the next level, and so we would love for companies increasingly to first call or figure out a way, call Be Here and we'll connect them if that's helpful, but to find a way to, before they develop their own thing, to partner with a post-secondary to do that. But the next level down, I think, issue there is about the transferability or portability of those company-specific programs. So no critique on what that program is, but it's probably designed to suit that particular company. But for the ability for that person to leave and go somewhere else, that part, I don't know that the labor market has proven that one yet. And which is fine if the person is a graduate of a post-secondary and that's part of their work experience, that upskilling course they took at Caterpillar University. But what I'm cognizant of and a little bit fearful of is the idea that might be the only thing that a young person might need, and just the Caterpillar U or just the Google certificate, because that's where I worry about their longevity and portability in the job market, recognizing very few people these days stay at one place forever.
Now, Matthew, as a father yourself with a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, you're still in the exposure phase to a large extent. Right. What is your approach on this topic with the added perspective that you bring as somebody who's, researches this topic and looks at it on a daily basis? What do you bring in terms of your approach with your own kids?
Oh man, I'm probably deeply frustrating to them. So, but it's definitely to, as I say, expose them to as many different things, not to go all in on one thing. So that can work and has worked. So for a lot of kids, but for mine, we like to expose them to as many different activities and to develop as many different skill sets. What's maybe when I say I'm maybe annoying to them is that I'm always asking them to talk about what it is that they've just done or what they've just read, to tell me the story of it. And that's partly me, probably because of my humanities background. That to me this is me realizing what skill I had, which was to tell stories, not about very specific wars or anything like that, but to take information, translate it in some kind of accessible way, and tell a story. And so I'm relentlessly asking them to tell me a story about their day or about what they just read or that activity they did. And so that, to me, I hope will serve them well in the future.
Matthew, can I ask you, with respect to certain households, certain families, parents have a really large say in what their kids choose as a career or even courses in high school into university. What can you say about that? Because oftentimes they end up taking something very general, like business, for example.
For sure, and I'll be careful not to step on parents' toes, but I think it kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier about labor market alignment, and I totally understand that parents have their own goals and aspirations for their kids and the direction they want them to go in. But it is important to look at what the labor market actually needs. So at the moment, there isn't a huge demand for people with a business diploma or degree. In the same way that nobody's particularly asking, and I can say this as a bleeding heart humanities person with a history degree, that doesn't mean we shouldn't necessarily take those programs. And it goes back to, if you do, being able to articulate the skills that you have. But that kind of preoccupation with you must do a particular career might be actually doing those kids a disservice if there isn't actually a career pathway for them.
Finally, what do you believe in the short, medium, and long term needs to be done to actively address the skills gap?
Ooh, I'm going to say more applied experience. So I say that as somebody who spent most of my life just reading books, but I realized that the applied work experience makes all the difference, and it can make all the difference for young people. Now, I know that doesn't mean that won't work for K to 12 as well as it will for post-secondary, but that's the best answer we have right now. Some kind of work integrated learning to close skills gaps and help bring post-secondary industry and a bit closer together.
Matthew McKean, Chief Research and Development Officer at Business and Higher Education Roundtable. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.